Hello, podcast world, and welcome to the Beers with Engineers podcast, where we provide a pint of interesting and fun conversation with an occasional shot of geek. My name is Bert Ushold, and this is episode number 1515. Today, my guest is Tom Kenney, and the title, which I really like, is He Makes Jet Engines Cool. Literally. Something about myself is that I think the word literally may literally be the most misused word in the English language. So you can rest assured that I have not misused it in this context. After you listen, you can judge for yourself. A quick shout out to my company, Dexterity Engineering, where I provide experience design engineering services for medical products and more. Go to the website, dexterityeng.com, to learn about me and to download an alt code card. If you don't know what that is, and you're an engineer, believe me, you will appreciate having it. So let's meet Tom and find out how he makes jet engines cool. Hello, everyone. I would like to introduce you to Tom Kenney, a friend of mine. How are you doing today, Tom?
Doing great.
All right. I've known Tom for, I think, 10 or 15 years. We became friends because he is good friends with a friend of mine and previous guest on the podcast, Ryan Smith. All of us are engineers, and that's mostly coincidental and completely independent of any professional connection that we have. And interestingly, if you look at our common contacts on LinkedIn, they're all either engineers or software engineers, except for one lawyer and an engineering recruiter. And so if you look at my friends, outside of LinkedIn, there's a lot of engineers, even though there's no professional connection. So I'm going to start this podcast off a little bit differently and say, Tom, does that apply to you as well? Are most of your friends engineers, or maybe not most, but are there disproportionate number?
Yeah, I would say so, actually. I get friends through my professional activities, and it seems that even though, Brian and a wider circle of the friends that we kind of hang with from that area out there by Leominster, we're mostly connected to each other because of church things. We're all engineers, and I guess that's just because we kind of gravitate to each other. I don't know why.
It is kind of funny. Yeah. So I was a volunteer in Kentucky 20 some years ago, and two of the guys that I keep in contact the most with are both engineers. So the fact that we're engineers has nothing to do with how we met and got to know each other. All right. So that said, first question of the day. Are you drinking a beer? What beer and what it is, or what would you like to be drinking?
Yeah.
If you're not
Well, it's a double whammy question because I am drinking a beer, and it is it's a Yingling lager, and it's a nice beer.
Uh-huh.
But I don't usually drink Yinglings or lagers in generally because I prefer porters and stouts. But I decided that if the show is going to be called Beers with Engineers, I should bring a beer with me, and this is the only one I had.
There you go. And if my memory is correct, you're not the first one to be drinking a Yingling.
Oh, that's cool. I wouldn't be surprised.
We have to go back through my notes. And all right, so we got the beer out of the way. Next question or request. Do you have a joke to share?
No, I got something I can try. You can decide for yourself if it's a joke or not. So 3 engineers are riding in a car and going out to lunch or something like that. The car dies. The engine just cuts out and it drifts off to the side of the road. And they're colleagues, but they're all different kinds of engineers. There is an electrical engineer, mechanical engineer, and a software engineer. So the electrical engineer immediately pipes up and said, "There's something wrong with your fuel delivery. I think it's your injector pump." That's what it sounds like to me. The mechanical engineer says, "No way. That's an electrical problem. That was an ignition. I could tell by the way it died." And the software engineer says, "How about this? What if we all just get out of the car and get back in?" Insert rim shot here. So
yeah, that's a different variation on that joke that I've heard, because at first it sounded like you were telling it wrong, because I think the way I've heard it, the mechanical engineer suggests a mechanical solution because that's what he knows.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas you put a different twist on it where you say, it ain't my fault, somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
So that
Well,
was good. Oh, very good.
having worked
Different
with
twist.
electricals and softwares and some of the projects I've been on, yeah, I have experienced our tendency to point the finger to the other guy when something's not working.
Yeah, I think that's the human DNA in us that makes us blame somebody else.
Yeah.
Like it has anything to do with engineering. All right, very good. So let's get on to the podcast in proper. And we usually start this with a little background on yourself and why you're an engineer, how'd you become an engineer, some interesting things along that avenue.
Okay, sure. Well, I think to begin with, I would classify myself as a classic gearhead. Been kind of a car fanatic since I was able to walk. And
Nice.
as soon as I understood that if I wanted to make cars or design them, you needed to become an engineer, that's what I wanted to be.
Okay.
Used to spend my spare time, you know, drawing cars in cross section and coming up with engine layouts and doodling all sorts of things related to cars. And
All right.
so I thought, well, I want to do this for a living. I want to learn how to really do this. And so my dad explained to me that to do that, I needed to become a mechanical engineer. So that's what I
Okay.
wanted to do. And as you go through
About how
high
old?
school, I'm sorry.
Do you remember about how old you were with that conversation with your father?
Um, it happened more than once, but no, I
As
actually don't.
conversations with our children often do.
Yes. So no, I don't because it was kind of a
Okay.
lifelong passion, and
Sure.
it was probably middle school age, especially as I
Okay.
was starting to think about what kind of schooling I wanted to continue pursuing because I also really like working with my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And I once I found out that within easy distance of the house there was what we call vocational high schools where I could take classes in the form of working on cars or building houses. That was all I needed to hear, and really wanted to do that. In fact,
Okay.
I was all signed up to go, but my parents kind of sat me down and said, "Look, it's not impossible to go to engineering college if you go to the vocational school, but it's going to be a whole lot harder. So pursue your dreams, but if you think you have this other thing as a dream, you might want to think about what you need to do to get there." And
Okay.
that was good advice, and I actually took it. And I can't say that that's my normal habit, but I I thought long and hard about what I really wanted, and it was hard to let go of that
Mm-hmm.
hands-on experience. But I stuck with the college prep program at the local high school. So there.
All right. That's interesting because I wonder if that advice would be changed these days. So I know when I was in high school and we're roughly the same age, the folks at the vocational school, mostly weren't the sharpest knives in the drawer. And, if you're a successful engineer, you're probably not really an idiot. So you wouldn't have fed in with that crowd too much. But now vocational school is much more, what's the word? Respected, I guess might be the word. At least that's my perspective. Maybe that's just as an adult. Maybe the kids still think they're all
No,
burnouts or something. I
it
don't
is
know.
very different. Your perception, I think, is quite accurate. And actually, that was part of my concern. As much as I wanted to do the hands-on thing, there were really at that time there were really two types of people who went to the vocational school. It was guys whose fathers were in the trades, and they were going to
Okay.
follow in their footsteps, or people who just couldn't hack regular school and were looking for a place to escape
Looking for something else,
and
right?
not drop out and get into the truants
Yeah,
system.
yeah.
But yes, you're right. These days, at least in Massachusetts, the vocational schools are extremely high quality and they're very competitive. They have waiting lists and they don't have
Interesting.
to take the people who can't hack school. In fact, you better be able to hack it or else you're not going to get through. My
Right.
son actually went there for a while until he dropped out to go to, well, I shouldn't say dropped out. He transferred into a junior college, but, or whatever they call it now, community college. But
Right.
in any case, yeah, no, you're right. They're a much different animal than they were when I was in high school.
Yeah, we probably could use a few more vocational schools because I know we need more plumbers and electricians,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. So, all right. So backing up a half step, the as a youngster self-described gearhead. Do you remember what was the first car that you really liked? Is it, oh, I want to have a fill in the blank?
As a youngster, what I really wanted was a Porsche 911.
All right.
That was my dream car.
Okay.
I liked the Ferraris, I liked the Corvettes, but I kind of caught the sickness from my dad. My dad really wanted a Porsche 911. He would scour the papers for used ones that were for sale, and if they were anywhere close to a price he thought he might be able to swing, we'd go off somewhere on a Sunday afternoon and take a test drive in it. And those were wonderful memories. But if he could afford it, they were basket cases, and the dream never came true. But
Yeah, right. Now, is your father a car guy like yourself?
oh yes,
Okay. So that's good fun. And so what's your current lust today? If you won the lottery, what's the car you're going out to buy?
there's just too many options now.
Which child do you love the most?
Yeah, yeah, that's about the size of it. I don't know. I admire a lot of really high end cars. I still admire the Porsches. I'm enough of a classic old guy gearhead that it annoys me that they make four-door cars now and even SUVs. So I'm a little mad at them. So
Yeah.
I might just do what all the other old guys my age do and buy a Corvette. I have no idea. I don't.
Right.
Just the other day, I saw something in the paper about a Bugatti that had 1,500 horsepower. I said, I would like to
That's a
just
lot.
spend an afternoon in that car, but there's no way I would want to own that crazy thing. Even if I could afford it, what would you do with it?
Yeah.
Besides
It's
die.
illegal to it's illegal to enjoy it,
Exactly.
pretty much.
And I discovered also thanks to my father when I was in high school, because for a while, what he could afford to buy was an MG Midget. And he let me drive it one day, one Sunday afternoon. And I discovered that if the car is really small and underpowered, you can have an incredible amount of fun at 40 miles an hour, which is perfectly legal. So I said, hey,
Exactly.
maybe
Exactly.
small, cheap, underpowered cars are the way to go.
Okay. Which that's what MG stands for, I think. Cheap underpowered car.
Pretty much.
All right. So to round it out, what are you driving?
Oh, that's almost an unfair question because I'm very practical right now. When you get around to asking me what I do for fun, I'll tell you why.
Okay.
But right
All right.
now, the fleet consists of a 2006 Subaru and a 2009 Mini Cooper.
Didn't you have a Miata? Or am I
I
thinking of
did.
somebody
I
else?
had a Miata for a
Okay.
long time, and then I just after we moved from the Central Mass area out here to the North Shore, I found I just wasn't using it,
Yep.
and I don't like to leave cars. I don't have like a big climate controlled garage, so if a car is gonna just sit still outside being
Yeah.
unused, it's going to be unhappy.
Right.
So
Right.
I found a guy who wanted it and sold it to him.
It's a little surprising that you don't see more cars like the Miata.
Yeah,
At least it is to me. I don't know. It's small, relatively cheap. You can have a lot of fun with it.
yeah,
Um,
it is kind of surprising. And I know I don't pay enough attention to the kind of demographic studies the car builders do to figure out what they want to
right.
make, but I know that everybody wants some variant of an SUV apparently. So
Right. Except for me, but that's
yeah, well,
a
I know.
conversation
Yeah,
for
you
another
and me
time.
both, but
All right. So, oh, I know. When do we get into this? I'm not sure. But all right, I will take some thunder away from you and mention that you work for GE, working on engines, correct? Jet engines?
yep, that's right.
Okay. So when we were setting this podcast up, I said, all right, well, you're not a rocket scientist, but you're close. You work on jets. And your reply was what?
My reply was that the company recently handed out T-shirts, and they usually explain why. This time they didn't. They just handed them out, and the T-shirts have a saying printed on the front of them that says, "Actually, it is rocket science." And that's cute, but we don't make rockets, so I don't know why they did that.
Yeah,
Um,
because being an engineer, I'm going to quibble with that because I don't think you guys make rockets.
no, we don't.
I'm not saying that jets are like falling off a log. But and so, of course, after seeing that email, I immediately Googled rocket, and I think very quickly it said, I guess you might argue it's jet propulsion, but it's not using air. It's carrying its own oxidizer.
Right.
So I guess the biggest difference between a jet is it's using air and fuel, versus a rocket is using fuel and oxidizer that it brings together. I mean, I suppose your balloon that you blow up and release, that's a jet in some sense, right?
In a way, but yeah, the more mundane, scientifically accurate term for the machines we make is gas turbine. And for some reason that I don't understand, they use that term when they're talking about the jet engines that they bolt to the ground and connect to a generator. They call those gas turbines. Um,
Okay.
Thermodynamically and mechanically, in terms of the internal workings, they're the same machines as the ones that fly around in the sky, but we don't call them gas turbines when they fly around the sky. I don't know.
Huh. That's interesting.
One of life's
I don't know.
mysteries.
I guess you got to have a new name for something because, if you just call it a jet, it's like, well, jet's been around for 70 years. Oh, but this is a gas turbine. Oh, well, that's new and different. We got to get ourselves one of those. So, all right. So, how did you get into GE and working on jet engines?
Well, I didn't, even though I went to college and I got through it, I did not land a job at an automotive manufacturer. And as I was getting to that point in life and I was getting older and thinking about what my life was going to look like, I wasn't really that sure that I wanted to live in the places where they do most of the automotive designing.
Okay.
But that was one factor. But the bottom line is, I managed to land a job at a place in Connecticut. It's not there anymore, but they made jet engines for the Army. So the engines
Okay.
for the Hueys and the Chinooks and the M1 tanks were built in this factory, and I landed a job there. And as far as I can tell, the only reason why they noticed my resume out of the pile was because I had kind of sort of helped out one of my professors with a project for the Army Tank and Automotive Command. I didn't end up doing that much, but I put it on my resume anyway, and it got their attention. So
Yeah.
that's how I wound up working in this industry. Been doing it mostly ever since. I got out for 5 years, but I missed it. GE was my ticket back in.
Okay. Now you're a Massachusetts native, correct?
That's right.
And so you chose not to go to Detroit, Toledo, Flint, whatever,
Yeah.
Dearborn, that area is. Yeah, I went to school in Detroit, so yeah, it's kind of it is what it is. And
My impressions were somewhat reinforced because by the time I graduated, I was already engaged to my wife Kay, and her mom, when she graduated and got her first job teaching, she taught in Detroit. And she kind of looked me pretty hard in the eye and said, "You're not taking my daughter to Detroit." Oh, again,
all right.
one of those few times I listened to the sage advice of my elders.
Yep, yep. Well, elders sometimes know some good things.
Yeah.
So what do you do on those jet engines? What are you responsible for? What kind of engineering geekiness do you contribute?
Well, I'll sort of lead from the beginning, I guess, if that's okay. So
Sure.
when I got that job down in Connecticut, I worked in. They had a program where new hires, fresh out of school, would work in 3 or 4 different departments over the course of 2 years, and at the end, hopefully, one of those departments and the new hire would come to a mutual agreement about where they were going to work. So
Excuse me one second.
yep,
Was that with GE or somebody
that
else?
was with a company called Textron Lycoming.
Okay.
And there is still a Textron Lycoming in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. They make piston engines, but this was their jet engine branch, and they sold that. So
Okay.
that business is now in Phoenix. Another story, another time. Anyway, so after that time period, during that time period, I ended up working in the group that was responsible for what they call the lube system. So there's a whole system of components that, from the tanks, pumps, filters, heat exchangers, and valves, and tubing, and oil nozzles, and stuff like that, that get the oil onto all the parts that need to be lubricated, and then retrieve it from there and manage it and condition it and all that stuff.
Okay.
But I worked in
Clean
that
it, cool it,
department.
send it back out.
Say again?
I said, clean it, cool
Yep,
it, send it back out to do it again.
that's right. That's right. So, yeah, so that's what I was doing. I enjoyed it. And then when the company got sold, and again, this time it was my wife who was about to have our first child, said to me, "We're not going to Phoenix." I got a job back in Massachusetts working for a company that made oil pumps for jet engines. And I worked there for a long time.
Okay.
And then, so I was still in that field, the pumping, the fluid delivery and management portion of the jet engine business. And then after
Right.
leaving aerospace for a few years, my ticket back in was to go work for the department in GE Aviation or GE Aerospace that does what I was doing before, kind of. They organize the work a little bit
Right.
differently than the other company, but it's the group that handles all the pumping. And this time it's oil and fuel. But so there's all kinds of valves, and there's different kinds of pumps, and there's all kinds of equipment that deals with all the fluids.
So I'm reminded of my very limited experience with, I'll say, jets. I was working on, it was a device for a company that sold cleaning materials like janitors would use. And they would have a tube going into the concentrated solution, and they'd have a hose blowing, squirting water out. And they had a little Venturi jet pump that, as the water would go through, it would bring the solution up. And they wanted to have different concentrations and different flow rates and this, that, and the other thing. And the big joke on that was, me and the other engineer working on it, we knew our fluids from college, but, we hadn't worked on them. It wasn't our life like it is yours. And so it was like every other conversation, it felt with, all right, we got 60 pounds of pressure at the inlet. And then, what happens? It goes through and hits the siphon and expands and contracts and goes out. And so that was, I think, to this day, we still use that joke every once in a while. All right, so you got 60 pounds at the inlet. And, but that was the other thing he did. We had a prototype. We went downstairs and tested it. And so, he's nervous about how your first prototype's going to work. He comes back and goes, "This thing really sucks." I'm like, "Oh, damn, that's not what we want." No, it's like, that's what it's supposed to do, Bert. It's supposed to suck stuff up. So when he said it really sucked, it meant it worked really well.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
there you go.
we like it when our stuff sucks.
One of the few industries, our stuff sucks better than yours. All right, interesting. What's changed since the beginning, as far as maybe the jet pumps or anything notable that's really different now than it was 30 years ago,
What?
aside from the obvious CAD thing in computers?
Yeah. Yeah. What has changed? Well, I mean, yeah, that's a good question because that stuff is so dominant and it so radically changes the way we do our work. But like, what else has changed? The the technology has really changed quite a bit. And so, I mean, just getting down into the engine geeky stuff, you know, the combustion process has not really changed a whole lot by itself,
Right.
mixing fuel with air and lighting it on fire and capturing the energy.
Yep.
But the the temperatures and the pressures that we can achieve because of the things we've been able to figure out how to do inside the engine have changed, many times over. Okay,
Okay.
so yeah, so the engine that I'm working on right now is around the same size as the engine that we used to make back in that company in Connecticut for the Huey, which was designed in the 50s, and it makes 3 to 4 times as much horsepower. It takes up about the same amount of space.
Okay.
And so I guess,
So a lot of that is, I guess, material science, right?
The material
Harder
science is a
materials or stronger
huge,
materials?
huge part of it. There are other techniques
Right.
in terms of surface cooling and stuff like that that help as well. But surface cooling costs energy. So material science is the biggest bang for the buck you can get. Yeah.
So surface cooling costs energy. Explain that a little bit, please.
Well, surface cooling, basically you're blowing air on things,
Right.
and the engine is the source of air. So
Okay.
any air that you're not using to produce thrust is wasted
Okay.
energy.
Got it. Got it. So it's kind of, in a sense, air is part of your fuel, a loose sense supply. And if you're taking some of your fuel off, you can't get as much oomph.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
That makes sense.
I mean,
That makes
when you're
sense.
sitting on the airplane, as a passenger, and you sit yourself down in the seat, and then you reach up over your head and you turn that little knob over there, pointing at your head to get some air blowing on your face. That air is coming from the engine. So the engine, you had to burn fuel to get that air, but you're not using that
Right.
air to produce thrust on the plane. So it's a
Right.
loss.
Right.
It's a parasitic loss.
Okay. Now, I'm guessing there's some sort of, I'll call it an alternator, where they're taking that spinning engine and getting electricity off of that. Is that correct? Or they get,
Yes.
is that different?
Nope.
They do that too? Okay.
There is a small alternator that provides power for the engine's own needs, and then there's a huge generator that provides all the electrical power for the airplane.
Okay. That makes sense. Cool. Talking about, okay, it's not rockets, but jets, kind of close to that. So what's your favorite part of your job? What's the passion? What kind of gets you up in the morning? Hopefully something besides just getting a paycheck.
Well, I really enjoy solving a problem. I my I mean, every engineer solves problems. That's what you get paid to do, right? But I mean, there's other parts of engineering. There's writing documents. There's developing test procedures, coming up with material to convince somebody that we should take a certain course of action. That's all part of the
Right.
job. There's mentoring, which is probably my second favorite thing, is teaching people how to do stuff and mentoring younger engineers. But as soon as you asked that, it's just like, okay, I can put myself in touch when the times over the last year I've been the most energized, and it was when there was a problem and I solved it.
Yeah. Solving that problem is exciting.
Yes, it is.
Is exciting. I remember, I don't know if I've told this story in the podcast yet, but I've told it a million times. There was this, it was just a stupid little lancing device for poking your finger to get blood. And it's like for a month, it felt like you'd come in Monday morning, you'd find some problem, everyone scramble, this, that, and the other thing. And by Thursday, Friday, you solved that problem. You all felt good. You went home. Lather, rinse, repeat, it started again the next week. And so after several weeks of this, one of these comes up, and this one just made absolutely no sense. And I can't remember the exact details, but it was like when something went fast, it didn't bounce, but when it's slow, it bounced a lot.
Hmm.
And it's like, the heck did it just, everything was counterintuitive. And Friday afternoon is, if it wasn't after 5, it was darn close. And I finally figured it out. It was something actually relatively simple, as often is the case. And for that product, it couldn't be that complicated. But I was psyched. So I went upstairs, and project manager was coincidentally just talking on the phone with a customer. I just sort of walked into his office, thrust my arms up in the air just with this sign of triumph. And I hear him say, well, it looks like Bert has some good news. I'll put you on speakerphone and he can explain it. So I went and explained everything, and just, it was just awesome. It felt so good. It's got it. It's why you become an engineer, so you can get that thing that works, that gnarly problem that you figure out and solve.
Yeah, yeah. I have a vivid memory of back there in Connecticut, and it was still not absolute certain, although we were having discussions about my so-called permanent spot, and kind of had an intention but not a final decision. And we were working on a problem on one of the engines. We were redesigning a big section of the engine, and we had cross section of the engine tacked up onto the wall of my the boss's office. And there was four of us in there, and there was me, there was a couple of 10-year guys, and the boss. And we were really racking our brains over how something was going to work out.
Hmm.
And it seemed impossible. It just was like, but why is it impossible? It shouldn't be impossible. Why can't we figure this out? And as I'm sitting there listening to these guys, because I was the neophyte and I tended to be quiet in their presence, which I have since learned is not necessary and not always the right choice. But that's the way I was. And
For sure.
so I was just kind of sitting there watching them work and waiting for them to give me an assignment and, go fetch, go do this.
Yep.
But as I'm staring at the cross section, something starts to crystallize for me. And think I'm seeing something. I think I'm seeing the answer. And I'm waiting for one of them to see it because I assume that if I see it, they see it.
Right.
But they
Right.
keep talking and they're not seeing it. So it's it gets quiet for just long enough for me to just sort of get their attention, stand up, and point to a section on a place on the engine, and said, "What about this here? Isn't isn't something going to happen here?" Well, I mean, I can reveal it. It's not military secrets. Aren't we going to get a bunch of flow right through here? And they all just kind of looked at each other and said, "Duh! Why didn't we see that?" And yeah, so solving a problem, that was the probably my first solving problem experience in a
Right.
professional environment. And yeah, you never get over that
Yep.
feeling. It feels good every time you
And
do it.
and I think maybe it was I don't know, just because you're the new guy, and it was just my way of opening my mouth in a similar situation. But I preface it, well, maybe this is a dumb idea, or
Hmm.
here's something crazy to think about, just so in case it is dumb and crazy, even at least to hedge your bets a little bit. But I find, and I still do that to this day, whether it's a personality for whatever reason.
Yeah,
But
no, I do the same thing, Bert. Yeah, so it's
and
just wired into you.
my batting average is pretty good. You
Hmm.
know, often enough people go, "Yeah, Bert, that's really dumb." Try again next time. But I remember one of the first occasions I remembered was this thing was going to warp. Say we were going to extrude. We say, well, we're going to warp because these ribs here. I said, well, can we just put like ribs on the other side that we don't use other than to prevent it from warping? And they go, we can do that. That's a good idea. So it's those little things like that that, as a beginning engineer, gives you confidence,
Yes.
I guess. So,
Yep.
if there's any young engineers out there, don't be afraid to open your mouth. You got through engineering school, you got a brain in your head, use it and show people that you have it and you use it. But, be open to being wrong and open to have your idea improved upon or whatever.
Right.
It's just, I mean, I guess as much as the next guy, I like my idea to be chosen, but as long as we as a group solve the problem, that's the most important thing.
Right.
All right, let's see. Let's go in a different direction. I'm going to get a tiny bit personal on you and reveal to the world that Tom has three kids, right? Three kids?
Actually, four.
Four. I asked my wife, does he have three kids? And yeah, he's got. So, about what you have four kids, and we're going to say 0.99 grandchildren. Your first grandchild is due today.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I'm thinking if it's not born today, it's tomorrow, then I guess we just keep adding nines, 0.999999
That
until
works.
it's finally born, and then you'll have one grandchild. So anyway, so that's pretty cool.
Yes, it is.
Let me ask this a totally non-engineering question. What about being a grandfather are you most looking forward to?
Hmm. Yeah. I actually thought about that a little bit because I said he's going to ask me that question and I need to have an answer.
Really? You read my mind.
Yeah.
Really good. That wasn't on my list of pre-questions I gave you.
No, it wasn't. I don't know why I was so prescient in that sense because that's not normally my gift. So what is it that I'm really just kind of I'm looking forward to the part where I get to share things And then, this is what they always tell you about what's great about being a grandparent. My parents said it to me when they were grandparents. They said, I love being able to share the joys and even the sorrows, but without having to be directly involved with the crap.
Right. Right. Yeah. They get to go home in the evening. All right.
Exactly. So, I
A
mean,
little whiny and cry. I mean, I guess, my oldest is just a senior in high school, so it's going to be a few years before I'm in your shoes. But I think my answer to the question is just holding a baby.
yeah,
That has my blood.
yeah, that's going to be
And
pretty
I guess
cool.
that's kind of what I'm looking forward to
Yep.
in a few years. In a few years. All right. So another conversation we've had in the past is, I think I've told you that, I look through LinkedIn and see people I've worked with that were peers or often enough, co-ops or whatever coming over into like directors and vice presidents and CEOs and whatnot. And there's this twinge of envy to like quickly go, but no, I don't want to be a director or a vice president or a CEO. I'm quite happy being an engineer. And I
Hmm.
think we agree on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
When I was down there in Connecticut, towards the end, I was down there for 7 years. And the last couple of years, we had kind of a old cubicle farm, but
Right.
so we had a lot of desks where there weren't any barriers between us. And so my sort of, you want to call him like a cellmate, was a young guy, fresh out of school, fresh out of Notre Dame when I was working with him. And we could all tell right away that he was a real go-getter, But I
Mm-hmm.
I stumbled upon the fact, thanks to LinkedIn a few years ago, that he was VP of Global Engineering for Pratt and Whitney. So I was like, holy crap,
That's not bad.
Chris did okay.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
it would be easy to be envious of this, but I actually had no desire at all to be VP of engineering anywhere, let alone Pratt and Whitney.
Right.
I don't want to be in charge of something that big where I'm worrying about all the broken stuff all over the world and who's doing what and who's getting in trouble there. And I just don't want to deal with that stuff. I had
Right.
two experiences just being a first line level manager, and I didn't like it either time. So
Right.
being the
Right.
big poobah, no thanks.
Yep. Yep. I'm gonna happily take his paycheck.
Yeah. Yep.
Hey, but he wouldn't be where he was if he hadn't sat next to you for that year and a half or
Yeah.
whatever it
Let's
was.
let's go with that. Sure.
I knew him when. Well, what's the phrase? Yeah, I taught him everything he knows, but not everything I know. So, right. Anything? We'll get some fun stuff in a minute. One last engineering career question.
Sure.
Anything you would have done differently, for better or
Hmm.
for worse?
The truth is probably not.
Okay.
Because I mean, I've had a really fun career. I've worked on some
Right.
really cool stuff. Like I said, I was in the lube system group down there in Connecticut, and then I became a lube pump guy. Then the company I was working for decided to branch out into a different technology area, and I got involved with working on it, and then eventually I was technically in charge of it, and I was having a blast. And we worked on some really neat stuff, and it culminated with working on the 787. Not everybody this year is really proud to be saying they've worked on Boeing projects, but it was a great time. We did some really cool stuff, and it was a really fascinating and eye-opening project. And then I left aviation, and I'm not sorry I did that. I learned some things. I got to see into a different industry and see how even companies with it was the same size organization as the one I'd left, and this had a lot of the same kind of people, but because the industry was different, the things they cared about were different. So,
Right.
most obvious example being when you're making stuff for airplanes, weight is really important. Well, these people were
Yep.
working in ship propulsion and oil and gas, and they couldn't possibly care less about weight.
Yeah.
And there were thousands of other things that they cared about that we didn't even give a passing thought to in the aviation
Right.
business.
Right.
So that was fascinating. It was a good experience, but I was surprised at how much I missed aviation. So I don't think I'd change that. And now the
Okay.
job I'm in now is I think just about a perfect fit, as perfect a fit as you could have. So there's not too much
Cool.
I would really
Cool.
change. I mean, I wasn't great academically, so you'd have to go back further to find something I might change. But I
Right.
can't
Right.
complain about the outcome of the results. So whatever.
Yeah. I mean, there's people say, you've got to plan your career. It doesn't sound like you did much career planning. Would that be a correct statement?
That is a very true statement. I was more of an opportunist. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
It, I mean, how can a high school student, even a college student, know that they're going to get jazzed in 30 years working on lubrication systems for jet engines?
right.
I mean,
Exactly. I
it
wouldn't
just
even,
almost doesn't make
yeah, I
sense to
didn't
say,
even know they existed. So why would I get jazzed
right,
about it? So,
right. Yeah. So I think be very open at the beginning. And part of the reason back there, I wanted to confirm if you're working at GE or not, because you went to several different places. And I know GE used to, I don't know if they still do, but that was a common thing to do, at least with folks on a management path, was, 6 months and, three, four, five, six different places.
yeah,
And then after that, it's like, okay, which is the best fit for you, for us, and so on and so forth.
yeah, we still do that with fresh graduates that we hire.
Okay. So even ones just on a technical path, or is it just ones that they've got
No,
to,
it's actually it's a huge program.
okay,
They call it the Edison program for obvious silly reasons.
right.
And they do have similar paths for management types and marketing types, but it's a massive global program. And what I mean by I mean like worldwide program for their standard way of hiring engineers out of college. Now, not
Okay.
everyone who comes out of college goes into that program, but I would say 90% of them do.
Okay. And does that mean as a college graduate working for GE, you can expect to move three or four times in the next couple of years, or might it just be within a local facility?
It can be either way. You
Okay.
can if you want to. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. But you can
Oh,
also
there's one
stay
if.
put. Like, it's not uncommon for people who get hired, sort of get inducted out in Evendale, Ohio, where our headquarters is, to take a rotation in Massachusetts and say, I kind of like it here. I don't want to go back.
Okay.
And, and
No.
and and conversely too, because while lots of people get excited about our oceans and our New Englandiness, a lot of people like the Cincinnati area for a lot
Mhm.
of really great reasons, not the least of which is the cost of living and kind of overall quality of life.
Hey, that was a nice segue that I was looking for a way to reference the Evendale plant, which is north of Cincinnati, and I lived even a little bit further north of Cincinnati for several years. And I just want to share with the folks that that's a big facility out there. I mean, it's right next to I-75, and you're going by GE buildings for the better part of a mile. That whole session. You've been out there a number of times, I bet, right?
I actually have been there half a dozen times. They're so spread out that I've only been to the main campus two of those times. So they have places way up in, oh, I can't remember the name of the town, but they have office buildings all up and down I-75 because they can't fit in that big main campus. But yes, I have been.
Oh, really? So I'm not sure I knew that. So even that a mile long of buildings is not enough to. So hey, making jet engines are rather complicated things to do.
Yeah, and then they have a lot of engineers, and they don't have enough office space for them in that facility.
Yep.
And I guess it's cheaper to rent an office than it is to build more buildings. But
All right.
yeah, that building when that building was a uh, a war plant, and
Okay.
I think it was managed by Ford to build something, probably some
Mm-hmm.
vehicles for the army.
Yep.
And at the end of the war, sometime in the 50s when GE took it over, it was the largest indoor enclosed space on the planet.
Was it really?
Yeah,
I never knew that.
yeah.
Because I think there's two buildings that I think are maybe first and second in that now. It's the vehicle assembly building down at Cape Kennedy Canaveral, whatever they call
Right,
it.
yeah.
By volume, It might be the biggest. And I think I don't know if it's probably not 747s anymore, but what are the assembly plants for Boeing up north of Seattle, Everett?
Yeah.
I think, for a single building, volume is, if not the biggest, it's top two or three.
Yeah, that
So,
that is a huge building. During that 787 project, I had a few opportunities to walk through that building, and
yeah, yeah, it
it's
takes a
bizarre.
while to walk through. All right, so I've been delaying this just because we're having fun talking other stuff. But when you're not working on lube systems for a jet engine, what are you doing for fun?
Well, a handful of things, but cut to the chase. The big centerpiece is we like to travel by motorhome. We do other types of travel occasionally too, but we really like to RV around the country. That's kind of our
Sweet.
main thing.
Where a couple of spots that you've really liked?
Well, just this past September, we spent the month of September in Utah.
Nice.
Some of the area around it, but mostly in Utah, and that was a fantastic experience.
So hiking in canyons, what sort of activities were you doing out
Yeah,
there?
hiking in canyons. They
Okay.
have what sometimes people sometimes refer to as the Big Five. There's five really hugely popular national parks
Hmm.
in Utah, and kind of go diagonally from the northeast corner down to the southwest corner. And
Oh, that sounds fun.
we visited them all, and so we hiked around them and camped and explored. Just had a really
Yeah, I
a
did
great time.
it was a rafting 4 or 5 day trip in Utah
Mm,
30 some years ago. Yeah, it's awesome. Loved it.
yeah.
It's very, very just gorgeous out there. And so speaking of RVs, do you remember that I did not borrow your RV a couple of weeks ago?
I had totally forgotten that you didn't borrow my RV a couple of weeks ago.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Actually, no.
No,
No.
you don't. All right. So is 3 or 4 years ago, we were at a party at I think it was Brian Smith's house, who
Mm.
we mentioned at the beginning, and I think you or Kay mentioned that you had an RV, and I sort of said, "Hey, can I borrow it in April 2024?" And
Okay.
you kind of looked at me funny and go, "I suppose why not? But why?" And said, "Well, there's going to be an eclipse, and I don't know where it's going to be sunny. I want to be able to drive to where it's going to be sunny."
As it turns out, it seems
So
like it
what
was
I
sunny almost everywhere for that one. But
say again?
I said, as it turns out, it seems like it was sunny nearly everywhere for that one.
I thought it was cloudy nearly everywhere because I was planning to go, and I was spending the week before looking. I was looking from Indianapolis further east, and it was like cloudy, 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 and then finally the bank of clouds stopped around Burlington, Vermont,
Oh, okay.
and so that's what I did.
I guess that's the segment
I
I did
drove.
not check because my daughter, the one who's about to have a baby, is out in St. Louis, and it was sunny there, and it was sunny in
Okay.
Texas because I heard some people telling stories about Texas, and it was sunny in New England, but I had not checked the between
Okay.
Burlington and Indianapolis arc. So
Yeah. Yeah.
okay,
Because my plan had to be somewhere in the Niagara Falls area for it, but it was going to be cloudy, so I said that's the last place I'm going.
yeah, right. Well,
But
so I had it. It's funny you bring that up because now I have a very clear memory of that conversation now that you remind me of it. But as we got close, I was saying to myself, there was somebody who wanted to use this RV for this trip, and I haven't heard from them, so I'm using
well, I think it's on them to call you. Definitely
it.
not your responsibility on that one. And yeah, and I don't think I ever mentioned. I'm not sure I mentioned to you once since then. It's
No, I
just
don't think so. I
one
don't
of
think it
those
ever
things
came
that
up.
I
But I knew there was somebody who had brought
had
it
in my
up,
back pocket.
and it was a future event, and I was like, yeah, whatever, sure, sounds fine. But yeah, and
Yeah.
I remember thinking
No,
about it.
yeah, I ended up sleeping in the back of my little Honda Fit, which was not as bad as I thought, as you might think it would be. I kind
Mm,
of put the seats down, slept diagonally, and it was pretty good. And the eclipse was absolutely awesome, spectacular. I loved it. And the 3 hour trip home took 9 hours.
yeah,
And to make it even worse, I had a manual transmission.
yeah.
That was not a pleasant 6 hours of sitting in
No,
traffic.
I don't think anybody who tried to come home the same day was having a good time.
Yeah, I think in retrospect, well, I don't know. Staying an extra night, or at least staying the night, might have been the prudent thing to do, but it actually never crossed my mind to do that. But
Well, that was our
so
original
be it.
plan, but we ended up not going at all. So.
Yeah. So what's your next trip, or what are some future trips, places you want to go in your RV?
Well, we'll be taking a few trips back and forth to St. Louis for the foreseeable future.
That's right. With
Now
the
that there's a
grandchild will
grandchild
be.
out there, and I'm a little bit delinquent in my planning for the summer, but I'm looking at basically doing a northeast Quebec loop this year. Further down the road, I want to do kind of a northern tier. Last year we did the southern tier with the Utah trip, and I'd like to do the sort of Glacier Yellowstone region
Okay.
in a couple of years. But there'll
Yeah,
be
I
stuff in
am.
between. I just haven't picked it out yet.
Yeah, it's not that my wife and I've talked too much about it, but that's something I can see us doing is getting an RV and going different places.
Yeah.
And I think we might throw in a few baseball games as well because we're haven't been to baseball games lately, but still really enjoy sitting in a baseball stadium and just watching a game. It's like,
Yeah, and actually, I'm looking for. I don't know. My daughter and son-in-law have declared their intention not to stay in the St. Louis area for very long. But if they're there and when the grandchild gets old enough for it to make sense to go to a ball game, I'm really looking forward to seeing a Cardinals game. They've got a really nice stadium out there, and
okay.
I haven't squeezed a game in any of our previous visits, but it would be absolutely fantastic to take a grandchild to a game.
So here's I could get in trouble admitting this in public, but so Busch Stadium is what the stadium used to be out there. And I used to tell a friend of mine that I want to go out there and put a big RO in front of it and an OLD at the end of it so it spells Rob Ushold. Because although my name, I go by Bert, my name is actually Robert Ushold. And at the old Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati, they had a big Busch sign out
Yeah.
on the wall there. And there was one time we actually did that. I got a big sign, painted an R and an O. I painted an OLD, taped it up on that sign, and there it was for the world to see. And much to my chagrin, I don't know, sometime around the second inning, the security guards took it down. I think I was a little surprised it lasted as long as it did. But 5 or 10 minutes after they took it down, a nice skying home run went out right out there. So had it still been there,
It would have been on camera.
everyone would have seen it on the home run shot. It's like, oh, I was so close to immortality.
Life is just not fair.
And then last joke on that, who was it? Sports Illustrated years ago had some little issue where they talked about famous people and what ifs. And apparently Fidel Castro was like a semi-pro, pretty good baseball player.
Yeah.
And they said, well, what if he was a little better and became,
Could have got
how would the world be
drafted.
different? That's right. And part of their little, paragraph or two about Fidel Castro was that he got in trouble for putting a big C in front of the Astrodome,
Oh, jeez.
making it the Castrodome. Hey, I could relate to that. I
Yeah.
could relate to that.
What
So
stands
me and
between you and
Fidel,
dictatorship, Bert?
it's very little. If those guys hadn't torn those signs down, things would be totally different.
Yeah.
All right, so we are about time to wrap up. So we have gotten to the part of the day where we ask the grab bag question. And you have pick a number from 1 to 10. I got a question assigned to that number, and you will be asked that question. Could be just about anything.
Wow. Okay. 5.
Number 5. Not the most exciting one, but not
Oh,
bad.
darn.
If you weren't an
Has he
engineer,
changed?
what would you want to be?
I'm sorry. What?
Nope, sorry. If you weren't an engineer, what would you want to be?
Well, the other probably a pilot.
Pilot.
Yep.
All right.
That's probably it. Yeah. My I mean, and I'm not sure that I ever had a shot at it, but when I was in high school thinking about how I want to design cars, the other thing I was thinking that I wanted to do was fly.
Mhm.
Uh,
Okay.
but my eyesight is terrible. It's been terrible since fourth grade, so I knew that
Mm.
that was not likely to be a successful path. So I didn't even
Right. Right.
didn't even give it serious consideration. But that was sort of my pipe dream.
Well, I know my dad became a pilot. How old was he? I know he was a pilot in 1990, so he would have been 62. Yeah,
Wow.
so Dad became a pilot in his late 50s, early 60s.
Okay. So there's still
Flew
hope.
for a couple of years. There's still hope. You still got a chance.
Yeah.
Just saying you got a chance. And so I remember one of the times when flying with him, I grew up in Buffalo, and so we ended up flying, around went over Niagara Falls. And he, I think it was whatever, single prop plane, but I guess they had two steering wheels, and said, "Hey, you want to take the steering wheel for a little while?"
Hmm.
Well, of course I do. So flying a plane is very easy.
Yeah.
Except landing and taking off, that's a lot more difficult.
Yes, absolutely.
And but as I recall, we were over Canada at the time, so I can say I've flown a plane, but never in the United States.
Okay.
And the other silly tidbit about that story was me and my friend of mine, we had both quit our jobs, took some time off before a new job, and I think, was it our health insurance lapsed the day we quit, but our life insurance went till the end of the month. And so I said, "All right, Dad, if we crash, you got to make sure we die, because we can't afford to live, because we only got life insurance and not health insurance." So that is my flying story.
Well, when it comes to plane crashes, I think the odds were in your favor.
Definitely true.
Yeah.
Definitely true. So, anywho, all right. Well, I will say any last word, questions, comments, speeches. The floor is yours.
Let's see. The floor is yours. Well, I mean, so if we're talking to engineers, and I mean, it seems like I don't know what the audience consists of, but we're so far your guests and so forth have been people who've been around the block a couple times and don't need a whole ton of career advice. But I guess the thing that's just popping into my head right now is that uh, the thing that I would tell a young engineer is that you gotta you gotta make your own path. You gotta make your own happiness with your job. You shouldn't be expecting it to just sort of come to you. So keep your eyes open and be ready to respond to an opportunity that presents itself.
Okay. All right. So, sounds good. Sounds good. As far as my audience, it's surprisingly international.
That's good.
Yeah. I think, depends on the month, but upwards of 20% are outside of the United States.
Oh, that's great.
Which, I find very interesting and surprising and
Yeah.
good fun. So,
There's
Tom, this
people
has
out there
been
who like to
fun.
drink beer and be engineers, I guess.
Exactly. So, Tom, fun. Thanks. By the time this hits the airwaves, you will likely be a grandparent. And I wish you all the best on that. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. Have a good night.
Good night.
That concludes our conversation with Tom. Thanks for listening, but I do have some good news to share. As we talked about, Tom's daughter had a baby boy the day after we recorded this conversation. So Tom and his wife Kay are in St. Louis, spending some quality time with little Magnus. Congratulations, Tom and Kay. Thanks for listening. Please like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends about this podcast. I would love to have you or someone you know on as a guest. Until next time, cheers.